Something happened in the skies over Tel Aviv last night that no defense engineer ever wanted the world to see. Not one missile coming down. Hundreds from a single launch. Iran has deployed cluster missiles in active combat. And if you don't understand what that means yet, you need to. Because it doesn't just change this war, it breaks the entire logic modern missile defense is built on. And once you understand how it works, you'll understand why America's most expensive defense systems are suddenly useless against it. Here's the science. And stay with me, because this is where it gets terrifying. A normal missile defense system works like this. Radar detects an incoming missile, tracks its path, calculates the trajectory, and fires an interceptor to destroy it. One threat, one response. The system was engineered for that equation. Billions of dollars spent perfecting it. Decades of testing to get the intercept rate high enough that governments could tell their citizens you're protected. Iran just broke that equation in half. A cluster missile launches as a single projectile. Radar detects it, one target. Defense system calculates the intercept. Interceptor fires. And then at a specific altitude, at the precise moment the defense system is committed, the missile opens. And from that single casing, hundreds of individual warheads release simultaneously, spreading across a wide area and continuing toward the ground. By the time the defense system realizes what's happening, the intercept window is gone. The one interceptor that fired hits the empty casing. The hundreds of submunitions are already falling. And to stop them now, you'd need hundreds of interceptors launched in the same second, which no system on Earth is designed to do. What you're seeing in the videos right now, the ones that look like fireworks exploding across the Israeli sky, those bright trails spreading outward like an umbrella, that's not one missile being hit. That's one missile becoming hundreds. That's the moment the defense system realizes it's already lost. Iran has essentially invented a way to make a single missile function like an entire missile barrage, and the world watched it work in real time last night. But here's what makes this even more devastating, and this is the piece that the military briefings are trying to keep quiet. The cluster munition problem doesn't just overwhelm interceptors. It overwhelms the entire defense budget calculation. America's most advanced interceptor missiles cost between $3 million and $9 million each. A single cluster missile from Iran's arsenal costs a fraction of that. To reliably defend against one cluster launch, trying to take out submunitions individually, you'd need to fire dozens of interceptors in the same moment. That's $100 million to $300 million in defense spending to stop a single incoming cluster strike. Iran can launch dozens of these in a night. And remember what we told you last week. America's interceptor stockpiles are already running low. Former Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said it publicly. The Pentagon is leaking it privately. The supply is limited, and the production timeline to replace what's being burned takes years. Now add cluster missiles to that equation, and you understand why people inside the Pentagon are not sleeping right now. The IDF confirmed something that reframes this entire conflict. Approximately 50% of all ballistic missiles launched by Iran at Israel since February 28th carried cluster bomb warheads. Not conventional unitary warheads, cluster munitions, weapons that do not detonate as a single explosion. Instead, they release dozens of smaller submunitions, each packed with several kilograms of explosives, scattering across a radius of up to 10 kilometers. The IDF stated Iran has been firing cluster-armed missiles at Israel almost daily since the war started. Most people assume interception means the threat is neutralized. In reality, cluster munitions break that logic entirely. Israel's Arrow system, David's Sling, the Iron Dome, they are all engineered to track and destroy a single re-entry vehicle on a calculable arc. A cluster warhead is designed to fragment. If the interceptor reaches the missile before it disperses, the threat is contained. But if the warhead separates at altitude, which is what these weapons are designed to do, the submunitions scatter across kilometers before any interceptor can engage them individually. One missile becomes dozens of independent projectiles. And there is a second problem that rarely gets discussed. Even when a cluster-armed missile is intercepted, the force of the interception can still rupture the casing and spread the bomblets outward. The defense system operates on binary math, hit or miss. Cluster ordnance operates on distribution. One warhead, 20 to 24 bomblets, and a 5-meter radius of dispersal. The evidence on the ground confirms this. In Yehud, just outside Tel Aviv, 2 construction workers were killed and a third critically wounded by submunitions from a single cluster-armed missile. They were outdoors. They never reached a shelter. More than 100 countries have signed the Convention on Cluster Munitions, banning these weapons because of their indiscriminate nature and the unexploded ordnance they leave behind for years. Iran is not a signatory. Neither is Israel. Neither is the United States. The interception problem is only one dimension. The second is what Iran has been doing to the systems that are supposed to make interception possible in the first place. The New York Times published an analysis based on commercial satellite imagery, verified video footage, and official statements. That analysis identified at least 17 American military and other facilities damaged by Iranian strikes across the Gulf region. 11 of those are U.S. military installations. The sites include Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, Ali Al Salam Air Base, and Camp Arifjan in Kuwait, and the 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain. Several were struck more than once. Satellite images show damage to radomes, satellite dishes, and structures adjacent to THAAD TPY-2 radar systems, the tracking radars that coordinate ballistic missile interception across the entire region. Near Al Dhafra, in the United Arab Emirates, satellite imagery captured structural damage immediately adjacent to where an AN TPY-2 system was positioned. If damage affected radar support or communications, it could have reduced detection and coordination, but the full operational effect has not been publicly confirmed. Senior U.S. defense officials told The Times that Iran adapted its targeting strategy since the start of the conflict to focus specifically on American vulnerabilities. The interceptors and air defense systems meant to protect U.S. forces and assets. The Times reported that Iran's ability to damage these facilities, and this is the critical phrase, defied expectations in the Trump administration. That is not neutral language. Defied expectations means the planning assumptions were wrong. It means the pre-war intelligence assessment underestimated what Iran could reach and what it could damage. The Pentagon itself admitted it does not have a complete picture of all Iranian launchers still operational. Damage to the 5th Fleet headquarters alone was estimated at roughly $200 million. At Ali Salam, at least 6 structures tied to satellite communications infrastructure were destroyed or damaged. Now connect the sequence. Iran neutralized or degraded early warning radars in previous waves. Then it struck the Hatzor satellite communications relay south of Tel Aviv twice. Then it hit THAAD, tracking radars, and communications infrastructure across the Gulf. The pattern is systematic. Radars first, communication second. Then the heavy warheads arrive into a detection environment that can no longer see them coming or coordinate the response. The Khorramshahr reaches Mach 16 outside the atmosphere and Mach 8 during re-entry. If the tracking radar feeding your interceptor battery is offline, speed becomes academic. You're not shooting at what you cannot acquire. Iran is fielding 3 primary missile systems in this campaign. The Khorramshahr 4, a liquid-fueled heavy ballistic missile with a range of roughly 2,000 kilometers and a warhead capacity of 1,500 kilograms, enough to level a city block. The K-Bar Shaykan, a solid fuel medium-range system with terminal guidance capability, now being loaded with cluster warheads and what Tehran calls ultra-heavy payloads. And the Fatah, first displayed publicly in 2023, marketed as a hypersonic platform capable of mid-flight course adjustments to defeat tracking systems. The Khorramshahr 4 is the weapon the IRGC showcased in the 22nd wave of this operation, firing multiple units toward what they described as the heart of the occupied territories. During the June 2025 war, the 12-day war, Iran launched roughly 525 ballistic missiles at Israel over 12 days. In the current conflict, 500 missiles and nearly 2,000 drones were fired in just the first 4 days. The volume has tripled, the tempo has compressed, and the warhead types have diversified. Here is where the cluster dimension becomes a structural problem rather than a tactical nuisance. The IDF confirmed that cluster warheads were first deployed against Israel during the 12-day war last June. In this round, they have become routine. Footage verified on March 1st showed 24 submunition fragments streaking across the sky above central Israel after a warhead separated during descent. On March 4th, 12 people were wounded when cluster bomblets struck multiple locations simultaneously. The dispersal pattern is the signature. When police report a dozen impact sites from a single launch, it is not a guidance failure. It is a cluster warhead performing exactly as designed. U.S. officials have stated that Iran's missile production capacity runs at approximately 100 units per month. He then acknowledged that the United States can manufacture approximately 6 to 7 interceptors per month. Read that comparison again. 100 missiles per month against 6 or 7 interceptors per month. That is not a ratio either side can sustain. During the 12-day war in June, the United States burned through roughly a quarter of its entire THAAD interceptor inventory, a quarter of the national supply gone in 12 days. Each Iranian ballistic missile costs somewhere between $200,000 and $500,000 to manufacture. Each Arrow or David's Sling interceptor used to shoot one down costs between $1 million and $3 million. Israel is spending 5 to 10 times more per engagement than Iran is. That arithmetic does not improve with time. It gets worse. The blackout referenced in this analysis is not a metaphor. It is happening on both sides of this war simultaneously. In Israel, the IDF Home Front Command has maintained nationwide emergency restrictions with no announced expiration. Schools remain closed, public gatherings are capped at 50 people, workplaces can only operate where bomb shelters are accessible within the required warning window. Power disruptions have followed Iranian strikes in central Israel. Damaged infrastructure, scattered debris fields from cluster munitions, and continuous shelter directives have functionally paralyzed civilian life across the country's commercial center. What we are seeing now is the systematic dismantling of the architecture that has governed the Middle East for 40 years. Not in a chaotic, uncontrolled collapse, but deliberately, methodically, layer by layer, at a pace that keeps the world slightly off balance and unable to mount a coherent response. Military layer gone. America's missile defense credibility has been shattered publicly. The THAAD radar is destroyed. Cluster missiles have exposed the fundamental vulnerability in the defense intercept model. Interceptor stockpiles are depleting faster than they can be replaced. 25% of early warning capacity in the region is offline. What does America actually do from here? The options are genuinely constrained in ways they have not been in any previous American military engagement. Escalating conventionally means more of what is not working. More expensive interceptors chasing cheap drones, more bases getting hit, more Gulf relationships fracturing. The math gets worse every day, not better. Escalating to regime change in Iran requires ground forces in a country of 90 million people with deep military preparation, complex terrain, and decades of experience designing exactly the kind of asymmetric resistance that destroyed American campaigns in Iraq and Afghanistan. De-escalating and withdrawing means accepting the deal Iran offered from day one. American bases leave, strike stop. This is politically humiliating, but it is the only option on the table that ends the military and financial bleeding. History is watching which choice gets made, and history already knows how countries choose when their leaders make the political cost of withdrawal feel larger than the human and economic cost of continuation. They continue until continuation becomes impossible. Last night, hundreds of cluster submunitions rained down from a single missile over Israel. This morning, defense analysts are recalculating every assumption about missile defense economics. Tonight, somewhere in Tehran, planners are reviewing the next phase. In Washington, in the buildings where the decisions that caused all of this were made, the people responsible are trying to figure out how to explain to the American public that the precision defense systems they were promised cannot stop a weapon that turns one missile into hundreds in midair. They do not have a good answer. History never forgives the people who chose pride over peace when the price was paid by everyone else.